Good afternoon. Thank you to AAUW for your support and the opportunity to share my work with you all. My name is Madelene Javier Dailey. I'm an urban planner working as a consultant for the state of Florida. My area of expertise encapsulates transportation planning, community vision planning, FEMA response support, and project management work for environmental policy compliance and mitigation. I'm currently pursuing my master's in architecture at the University of Southern California, where my academic work focuses on equitable urban planning and sustainable design. Using my experience as a planner, my work expands discussions on sustainable development in urban environments and the value of placemaking in architectural practice to create habitable, healthy communities. Outside of my work in academic studies, I serve as a director for Architecture Plus Advocacy, a program developed in response to understanding, acknowledging, and working to address architecture's accountability and impacting communities. Our program intersects community-based architecture with public interest design. Public interest design, or civic design, is a holistic participatory approach that focuses on the well-being of every individual and addresses issues around economic, spatial, and environmental equity through a collaborative perspective. It also challenges the systemic structures currently used in architecture that dictates the type of experiences and narratives reflected and shared in our societies. It shifts principles of architecture away from the final outcome of how it should look by opening up opportunities for system-level change in how it should work. Specifically, it's a framework for reimagining how architecture impacts our world, who it benefits, and how it affects people on an individual scale. We are a 501c3 nonprofit working to combat spatial injustices in the built environment through community-led design. Our approach is design with, not for people. We're able to do this through unique design practice that allows everyone to reflect on their lived experiences, listen to the experiences of others, and collaborate together to design equitable solutions in their neighborhoods. We believe everyone, not just trained architects, should have a hand in designing their homes, businesses, and neighborhoods. Through our organization, we work with local nonprofits, community organizations, student groups, and neighborhoods to plan public events, lead community-driven architecture projects, inspire community members to be advocates and stewards for their own communities, and support diverse voices and ideas through our organization. To do this, we offer multiple programs through different forms of community engagement. We organize community workshops that engage South LA residents in the LA planning process. We host architecture workshops that introduce students to careers in STEAM. We develop community outreach events at grassroots levels, and we train emerging architecture, engineering, and construction professionals in community-driven leadership development. Our passion is to center the people who make change possible. Specifically, we connect with residents and neighborhoods advocating for their communities, local nonprofits and public programs for all ages, high school students and after-school programs in underrepresented areas, and our own student volunteers. Through our programs, our participants are able to understand and apply basic architecture skills to problem solving, understand spatial injustice and how it affects their lives, and think of themselves as architects, creative designers, and change makers in their communities. Since 2020, we've organized over 37 workshops, supported more than 100 student leaders and young professionals, and worked with over 395 participants through our high school programs, community service projects, and advocacy campaigns. We hope that through our program, it inspires and instills the idea that change can start anywhere, even at the smallest scale. Our process centers around three pillars: our philosophy, our approach, and our goal. Through these, we aim to support communities, like-minded partners, and new generations of voices in building sustainable communities. As a director of A+A, I developed our first ever design, build, and community workshops program. For this, we partner with existing neighborhoods and community-based organizations to design and construct low-cost or pro bono projects that increase resource access in underserved neighborhoods. The project is determined by our community participants and is carried through to completion by our team of volunteer students. Through our design builds and free community workshops, we aim to show how architecture can be a tool to bring people together. Our students work directly with communities to preserve local cultures, histories, visions, initiatives, and resources. These are some images from our design build program last year. We worked with a local nonprofit performing arts conservancy and its students to design an interactive storage and seating installation. This project addressed their needs for creating collaborative multi-use furniture, which could be adjusted to be seating, storage, or prop pieces for their rehearsals. This project excited our student volunteers because it was many of their first experiences working with real clients and stakeholders in their neighborhood. Many of them have gone on to incorporate this type of work into their own school projects. A huge motivator for me is supporting minority voices and representation in architecture. a field that's been historically limited. In 2019, the National Council of Architectural Registration Board identified that 50% of licensure records were created by female students. However, according to the American Institute of Architects, as of 2020, only 17% of all licensed architects in the United States are women. Women are also less likely to receive leadership roles or higher compensation for leadership work in architecture firms. Recognizing the gender-based pipeline between education and profession, I decided to make my first venture with Architecture Plus Advocacy's Design Build program foster leadership roles for female students. Comprised of various fields related to architecture, planning, preservation, and research, my ambition was to create opportunities for women to take on leadership responsibilities and develop skills that could be utilized in professional settings after graduation. While our program is open to everyone, we strive to create new pathways of opportunity that allow all voices to be seen and heard. Outside of my work with Architecture Plus Advocacy in this capacity, I've also held leadership positions with the UOC's National Organization of Minority Architects chapter, the Student Association for Women in Architecture, and the AIA Architecture for Communities Los Angeles Committee. I'm also the recipient of UOC's first AIA Freedom by Design grant and the winner of the 2023 Association for Women in Architecture and Design Student Award. After graduation, I wish to continue the work I've developed with Architecture Plus Advocacy in my career. This summer, I was selected as a fellow to work with Shade Institute, Hawaii's first public interest design organization. I worked directly with residents of the Kanahili Homestead in Oahu, Hawaii, to develop a community park and cultural center. Designing together, we identified design opportunities that reflected both the values and practices of Hawaiian culture and customs, such as locally sourced sustainable materials, low carbon emission fabrication methods, land stewardship management, small business inclusive programming, and youth educational workshops. Phase 1 of this project has been completed, and they're currently in Phase 2 funding campaigns. This year, I received the USC School of Architecture Travel Fellowship to study the effects of urbanization on rural communities in Latin America. Traveling to Guatemala, I will be working with residents of Ipala in Guatemala City to identify areas of significance and opportunity in public design. This is a continuation of an independent research project I began during my undergraduate degree, where I studied the spatial and social relationships influenced by Indigenous women-run cooperatives and their connection to tourist-driven areas in the country. This work will be continued through my final year of study and disseminated as my thesis and a proposal on how architecture can be a tool for sustainable infrastructure development and community resources programming. I'd like to take a moment to thank AAUW again for your continued support and to show gratitude to some of the women who have helped guide me to where I am today. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Adiba Juya. I am currently pursuing my master in International Policy and Development at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Montreal, with concentration in development economics and policy. I'm originally from Afghanistan, and I'm on my second semester of study. I'm currently in the process of conducting a research on the female labor force participation in Afghanistan, specifically focusing on the period after mid-August 2021, after the fall of democratic regime to the hands of Taliban. I found this a critical topic given the significant changes and transformation in the lives of Afghan women after the fall of democratic regime, which have led to the exclusion of Afghan women from almost every social and economic spheres across the country. And this exclusion have, for sure, a long history, cultural and political and economic roots that we'll come back on. Although my research is still in its early stages, I would like to take this opportunity to share some of the preliminary findings and insights I have gathered so far. After the fall of democratic regime to the hands of Taliban have around mid-August 2021. Taliban systematically started removing women from almost every economic and social spheres. They started with banning secondary schools and prohibiting women from the government jobs, and then moving forward with prohibiting them from the private jobs, and they gradually expanded their misogynist commands to the private sectors. And at the point that in the beginning of 2023, they shut down the only woman-owned business, which were beauty salons. For many women, that's their only source of income. many women went on the streets and they started protesting in the streets to rise for their basic human rights of working, being in the working context, and of their participation in the labor force. What they want was to be able to work and because there are so many women who needs to work because they are widow, and some of them are the mean person for the household's income. But they were stopped with pipes and cable cars. Up until prior to the fall of Afghanistan, the country experienced bombing, assassination, insecurity. However, on the positive side, there were a significant improvement in the number of opportunities for women in the workforce. Today, under this rule of Taliban regime, there's no specific laws and regulations that intentionally supports participation of women in the labor force. There's literally no specific laws to support that. Just if there are women working in the workforce, for example, as a teacher or as someone who is working in the health sector, that is just because out of obligation. Otherwise, the Taliban would prohibit that too. Here we see that statistics from the countries with the lowest female labor force participation rate. The percentage of age and of the age of people from the countries like Afghanistan is in the very lowest ranking, of course, that the percentage of ages 15 and older. In 2019, Afghanistan owns only 16% something, and then for the secondary school enrollment rate in 2018, there is a huge gap between men and women participation in the labor force for secondary school enrollment. So it is quite high in Afghanistan rather than any other country. We can say that we can say that one of the main barriers for women in the workforce has been political instability, and the political and economic stability. It has always been the case when it comes to the female labor force participations, and it is a significant factors. That after the fall of the first regime in 2001, less than 1 million children were in schools. None of them were girls. Gradually, over the 2 decades, democratic regime Afghanistan and the democratic regime, they work on their constitution as of that it happened that as of 2024, 27% of seats in parliaments were given to women, and as of 2021, women had 69 seats out of 249 in parliament. There were projects for women and for women to come and work, and we also had a ministry in there, that's Ministry of Women Affairs, that were working on the ground for the women affairs, and along with the other health sectors, other sectors for women. Upon the fall of Taliban in 2021, mid-2021, Taliban issued 80 commands, and that out of these edicts and commands, 54 of which were to only women, which is like, it doesn't make sense sometimes that if you are thinking that, okay, many of your commands are just to women, because this misogynist commands are when it goes to the specific community, it is unfair. And today, after 2 years, girls are stopped from pursuing education beyond the 6th grade. Their ability to work outside of health and education is all prohibited, and who knows that it is going to carry on for the rest, if the situation is going to remain the same. So that the important part is that this problem has to be identified, and why, and what they're thinking about. Of course, they think that this might be going on for a long time. And that's how they support their ideologies. After reviewing a range of literatures and their findings, I come up with a range of I found some findings that that supports that the idea of female labor force participation in Afghanistan is a complex concept to study. Many interrelated factors and complex factors are there are 2 factors to consider along the way, like, for example, level of economic developments, education attainment, social dimensions like marriage, fertility, and women's role outside the households, institution settings like laws, protection, and rules. These all are significant factors that makes the idea of women's participation in labor much more complicated. It all has to be measured and taken into account too while we are speaking about female labor participations. While there's a need for policy to enforce women's empowerment, promoting equality, it's been challenging in countries with long-standing traditions that sustain discrimination in all dimensions of life. Even with political will, if there is a political will, economic will, policies are often insufficient to change. It takes a long time, and it's because it's very deeply rooted to the norms in the culture of the society, which is stereotypical, and it thus takes a lot of time to be resolved. One of the factors that I found quite very relevant here is that female labor force participation in Afghanistan is due to supply side barriers or factors that affect the factors that affects the supply of female labor participation, but also the demand side barriers. The supply side is that when all those factors that are causing women not to go and participate in the labor force, for example, the norms, what's happening in the households, whether they are allowed to or not, those are the demand side, the supply side. But the demand side is also that if there is enough opportunities for women, if the community is supporting them to participate in the labor force, that's a different question. That both sides is a very big question when it comes to the context of Afghanistan. And also another factor, which is security. Security has always been a big issue when it comes to Afghanistan, because Afghanistan has always been surrounded with the terroristic regimes around, and even prior to the Taliban regime, there were assassinations, there were bombardings, and the terroristic attacks that you would say that women are not safe. That's why families would not allow their wives and their daughters to go out and work. So that also has been a significant factors here. I will advance my research through interview. So this is the information that I have available for now, the findings of that after reviewing literatures about my topic, but I'll carry on with interviewing women who have worked in Afghanistan, and they had to leave a country for some reasons, and then there were women who are still there, and then what is this situation? I would do a multidimensional interview and will come up with further informations. And also, last but not least, I would like to express my sincerest gratitude and thanks to AAUW for your enriching support over the past couple of months and weeks. It has been a pleasure to be working with AAUW. Thank you very much.
My name is Paula Kirya, and I am currently a first-year master's student at the University of California, San Diego, and I work in the Mechanical Engineering Department. So I'm going to be discussing my research project funded by the AAUW's Selected Professions Fellowship. And I'm going to begin by discussing the topic of breast cancer. So breast cancer is the most commonly diagnosed cancer among women, but it is also the most commonly diagnosed cancer worldwide. After a patient receives a cancer diagnosis, the most important step for their survival is to receive the right prognosis so that they can get the right treatment. So recently, the structural arrangement of collagen fibers within the tumor microenvironment have shown to be indicators of cancer metastasis. So the density, distribution, and alignment of fibrotic components, like the common collagen fibers within the extracellular matrix, have shown to signify tumor progression, metastasis, and resistance to therapy. So to adequately capture these signatures, we need the appropriate tools to address this cancer and help patients on a global scale. So what are the different ways that we can measure and identify these collagen fibers? So existing techniques include biochemical staining, like the standard H&E stain. So it provides a lot of information. It's seen as very reliable, but it doesn't quantify the tissue microstructure. So we can turn to other technologies that are more advanced, like second harmonic generation microscopy. So this allows us to see the very fine fibers at very high resolutions, But this kind of technology is very complex, very expensive, so it's hard to access these techniques on a larger scale, especially in under-resourced settings. So we can turn to polarized light microscopy because polarized light microscopes are commercially available. They're comparably inexpensive, and you don't need a stain to identify collagen fibers with polarized light microscopy because it takes advantage of the intrinsic optical properties of fibers within tissues. So they selectively interact with light, which is what polarized light microscopy is good at detecting. But this optical property of tissue is inherently weak, so it's very hard for an observer to pick up these collagen fibers without image processing tools. So to address this issue, we turn to nature and use the morpho butterfly's iridescent blue wings. So the morpho butterfly is able to strongly scatter structural color from the surface of the wings and have shown the ability to map the polarization state of light onto specific colors and degrees of intensity. So this is shown when we look at the morpho wing with circularly polarized incident light and linearly polarized incident light, where we observe two unique presentations of color. And when we image a section of the morpho butterfly wing between the cross polarizers of our microscope, rotated from 0 to 180 degrees, we observe angle-dependent fluctuations in intensity. So a physical model of the light intensity profile can be derived with Jones matrix calculus. So you model the morpho as with the Jones matrix of a wave retarder, which is an optical component that is rotated by an angle psi in the counterclockwise direction and induces along the fast axis a phase shift delta. And so from these two parameters, we can determine the retardance and the optical axis orientation. So after observing and quantifying the morphosensitivity to polarized light, we want to see how they interact with fibrotic tissue. So for this, we've collaborated with the Young group from UCSD's pharmacology department, and they've selected a set of mice models that have tumors with high or low collagen content. And we've interfaced these tumor sections with our morpho butterfly wing and imaged this all together in a system with a commercially available polarized light microscope. So this is actually a very simple platform that introduces a potential for an enhanced, low-cost, and label-free approach to polarized light microscopy. So an example of this is shown with our high collagen tumor section. Here we have an H&E stain, and here we have an image taken with conventional polarized light microscopy. So not much can be observed in this image, but when we introduce our morpho butterfly wing into the system, we can see fibrotic components being highlighted. Now, if we rotate our sample, again, with a change of stage angle, we do not pick up much. But when the morpho is present, we see a stronger degree of these intense fibrotic components being highlighted. And if we do a full 180-degree rotation, we see these angle-specific changes in the optical behavior of the tissue section, far preceding what we see with traditional polarized light microscopy. And though this is something that we can observe by eye, we still need to quantify the local information in that region of interest that we're imaging. So this, again, we're going to turn to Jones calculus. Now we model the morpho and tissue together as a single wave plate with its distinct optical axis orientation, phi, and retardance delta. So this is allowing us to compare different regions within a singular ROI that we're imaging to compare the structural properties that is relevant for a diagnosis. So for example, we've selected two regions that have shown to behave very differently in our images, and the intensity profiles of these two regions were fit to our derived Jones calculus equation. So here we saw that within these distinct regions of interest, comparable retardance values, but very different optical axis orientations. So in summary, the morpho has shown to strongly reflect structural color, the map the polarization state of light to specific colors and fluctuations in intensity. And this means the morpho butterfly introduces a versatility and translatability across diseases. But looking forward, we can use what we've learned for Thermorpho to develop optimized structures for more sensitive imaging. This leaves the potential for a highly accessible, low-cost, and advanced method of diagnostic imaging that we have not yet seen before.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me on. My name is Jessica Lau, and I am so excited to present my projects for this upcoming year. And it's going to be under diversity and inclusions in classrooms. So this is going to be for the career development grants, and just a little bit of a background on myself. I am an aspiring teacher, and I am part of the multiple subjects teaching credential program at California State University, Fullerton. And I'm super motivated and excited to be sharing with you the projects that I'll be doing in 2 classrooms. So one of them will be in a TK or transitional kindergarten classroom and a 6th grade classroom. So here I am, and this is actually a part of my substitute teaching. I did long-term substitute teaching when I was, this was kind of a year ago, but yeah, I've been teaching for about 3 years, but I want to hone in and improve my craft and and share the love of learning and teaching with my students. And that's why I wanted to become a full-time, possibly K through 6th grade teachers. So I'm absolutely open to all types of subjects and or grades. And this one here in this picture, I'm with a 3rd grade class. And we were talking about a lot of social justice issues, and the school is very proactive in having us teach those themes. So my goal, and I do want to implement this in my own classroom, is to introduce social justice themes in the classrooms. So this is a concept that I will be focusing on, as I'm a part of the ethnic studies cohort in the school. And here are some of the ways that I can implement this. So I have 3 social justice themes. One would be, as pictured here, self-love. Number 2 is respect for others. And number 3 is social justice and diversity. And there are 6 pillars, but these are the 3 that I do want to focus, and the other social justice themes will be embedded within those. And as for the project, excuse me, I'm going to move these my screen along. So I just wanted to plant seeds, metaphorically, for my students to learn about these social justice themes. And what I have for project number 1 is a read aloud of appropriate social justice theme books and accompanying activity for transitional kindergarten students. And I know some educators might think that this might be a little bit too early for students to learn about those, but I believe that we need to start to plant those seeds of self-love and other themes in the students' learning, so that they will be a lot more willing, a lot more welcoming towards people who may have different backgrounds, cultures, ways of thinking. So my plan for this lesson plan is to have books such as Hair Love and Diversities for Everyone be included within that curriculum, so that the students will start thinking about ways that they're different and how they're accepting of each other. So that would be my goal for this project. And for the second one, project 2, we're going to explore number talks and using manipulatives for transitional kindergarten students. So what I mean by exploring number talks is I as an educator, I want students to be able to recognize that many of us have different ways of thinking. So that is also diversity of ways of thinking in and of itself. So I want to bring that out to students by having number talks that are open-ended questions, such as how do you make 4 or 5 or any type of cardinal number with these sets of manipulatives? And you'll be surprised that there are going to be very different answers amongst the group, and some students might be relating to that or have similar answers to their peers or different answers, but they all lead to the same answer. So that is an idea that I want students to be able to take away from in this project. And also moving from TK, I'm going to have project number 3 be geared towards my 6th graders. So project 3 will be social justice poetry creation and presentation from those students. So with 6th grade students, their way of thinking is obviously a lot more mature, and so they can take on more advocacy projects. So I would like to introduce works of Maya Angelou or Langston Hughes and other renowned poets, people of color. And that way they will be more inspired to create their own poetry based on perhaps their some of the community issues they might be facing, or anything that needs a little bit more attention to bring awareness to these issues. So that would be for my 6th grade students, just to showcase what they know about their community and how they're going to problem solve within that space. And I feel that with using those 3 pillars of social justice, the students might be able to think and prepare and galvanize their actions towards advocacy within their own communities, and which will blossom into possibly the regional or federal or national spaces as well, or international. So hopefully they'll be able to think about it and spread awareness that way, and that they'll become leaders in their own right. And this is pretty much the conclusion of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to share with you my projects extensively in the later months. So thank you so much once again, and I'm super excited for the future endeavor. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Krystal Lau, and today I'm going to be chatting with all of you about the importance of diverse representation in storytelling and some of my previous work experience in writing for children. And before I get started, I just want to say a massive thank you and shout out to AAUW, and thank you for this privilege and opportunity of being able to receive the Selected Professions Fellowship, which enabled me to attend Stanford University and get my master's in business administration. I'm currently in my first year in my MBA program. So a little bit about me before we dive in. My background is that I graduated with a BA in communication from UCLA in 2019. And after that, I worked at Meta, then called Facebook, for the past 4 years in product. My focus was on the emerging market space, building digital literacy products for new to internet users. And this interest and curiosity in digital literacy later ties in with my interest in storytelling. So how does product management connect to being a novelist? I've pursued these 2 separate careers for most of my life, and people always ask me this question because on the surface they seem quite disparate. But actually, I would say that there are some commonalities between the 2. First is that both careers require and engender curiosity in new ideas and in new people and in new communities. Second, they also require empathy For PM, they require empathy in your end user. How do I create the most enjoyable and useful product for my user in mind? And then for a novelist, how do I write an entertaining and informative story for my end reader? And finally, both careers require storytelling expertise. For product managers, it's all about how you pitch that product. And for novelists, it's about how you tell the story, how you write the character, and how you shape the narrative. Because any story idea can seem similar on the surface, but when you dive in deeper, it's about the execution of the storytelling that makes a difference. So this all relates to my background growing up as an Asian American in Northern California. And as a child, I loved to read. I was fortunate that I had many books at home, and moreover, I lived 10 minutes by bike from my local library. And so there was never a dearth of books available. And I was always reading some new story across genre, across age category. I loved books. I saw myself in many of the characters that I read. That being said, there was always one thing that was missing. And it was hard to find characters, especially main characters, who looked like me and came from the same cultural heritage as I did. Most of the characters I read were white, and the only Asian characters I saw growing up were either side characters such as Cho Chang in Harry Potter, or they were characters that were famous, quote unquote, for their trauma, such as Farewell to Manzanar, which is about a Japanese American girl who goes to an internment camp. And I was curious, why are there no stories about, young girls who are looking for joy, who are, from a more normal background, who are people that I can relate to. And I didn't actually understand fully why I cared about this so much until later on when I read Rudin Sims Bishop's writing. And what Rudin Sims Bishop says here, I'll read it aloud. Books are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through in imagination to become part of whatever world has been created or recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experience as part of a larger human experience. Reading then becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books. What I was doing as a kid is I was reading books and looking for mirrors and windows through which to see my own world and myself reflected in. And not being able to find that, I felt dissatisfied. And to be honest, when I first started writing stories, because I always wanted to be a writer, the stories that I wrote only featured white characters. And I think that's because subconsciously, I felt that the only stories worth telling were those by white main characters. So that brings me to the question, why are there not enough books written by people of color? And if we look at the books published between 1950 and 2018 in the US, what we can see is that 95% of American fiction books published were written by white authors. Author diversity has since then increased. However, white writers are still vastly overrepresented. What I asked myself when I started writing for children was, is this because people of color don't want to be authors, or are there other reasons? I soon learned that there were other reasons at stake. This is what the industry overall looked like in 2019, just a couple of years ago. So in the industry, the publishing industry, these are the gatekeepers who choose which books to acquire, which books to market, which books to promote and get onto bookstores to then be read by children. 76% of the industry is white. And this greatly affects the books that get acquired and get distributed, because people tend to look for themselves in their books, and people tend to relate more to stories that are like their own. So if the industry itself is white, it keeps perpetuating then books that are also written by white authors for white children. And that doesn't accurately reflect the world we live in today. This brings me to the problem area that I was interested in working in. Knowing how to read makes people safer, healthier, and more self-sufficient. yet more than 773 million people cannot read. And having worked in the emerging market space previously, I realized that most of those people do not live in the US. This brings me to Room to Read. Room to Read is a nonprofit focused on illiteracy and gender inequality, helping children from low-income communities develop reading habits and develop greater literacy skills. This was the nonprofit that I chose to work with in order to combat some of these issues that I previously talked about. So Room to Read has 4 main tenets that help to combat literacy in primary schools: community engagement, quality materials and learning environments, teacher support, and advocacy for change. I chose to focus on quality materials and learning environments. How did I do this? I partnered with Room to Read to write this picture book, My Elastical Fantastical Bubble, which is based off of my own childhood experiences as an introverted Asian American girl growing up in a big school where I found it difficult to make friends. And as a child, I actually used to imagine an imaginary bubble around myself when I was feeling really cold or really lonely or wanting to shelter myself from the outside world. And so in this book, an introverted young girl who loves video games uses this bubble to help her navigate the world and also to make friends. You can read the story online free here. And one thing I love about Room to Read is that not only are the stories distributed for free to different low-income schools across the US, and for this particular story, 70,000 copies were printed and distributed for free to children across the US. The story is actually also available online for free, and it was translated into both Mandarin Chinese and Spanish. That's it for my presentation. And this is just the start of what I'm hoping to do while getting my MBA at Stanford. I'm really interested in the digital literacy and children's education space and hope to combine my interest in technology and also in diversity and representation in children's literature in order to help tackle some of these problems that are increasingly important today. Thanks so much for your time.
Hi, my name is Cambrian Lopez, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my goals in terms of career goals as well as the future and how I plan to utilize my education to create a change in this world. I currently go to Southwestern College, and I am going to school to get an associate in science. My goal is to receive an associate in science with a focus on leadership and supervision. And I will utilize this educational certificate and degree to create change within the deaf and hard of hearing community. And that's where I work primarily, is with deaf students, utilizing sign language. And so I do have some goals as it pertains to the use of my degree and what I want to achieve through my research and education. Overall, working for the district and at the high school level, I want to create a transitional program that really will teach our deaf and hard of hearing students independent living skills and job training in preparation for adulthood after graduation. And so what that looks like is a few different things that I want to implement. To start off, I want to teach self-advocacy, educate the deaf and hard of hearing students on their legal rights and how to assert their rights under ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, within their local state, which we are in California. I want to also teach them how to access deaf-friendly community resources, such as nonprofits that provide ASL classes for their friends, for their family, and also those free counseling services and social opportunities that are also very available. Secondly, I want to improve communication. And with that, I mean improve their reading and writing skills in English, educate them on how to ask for and schedule qualified and certified American Sign Language interpreters. So depending if you work in, the legal arena, you need a certain certification. That's even if you are a part of an IEP, that's a legal meeting. Educational interpreters need a whole separate certification. And then there's the national level. So it's always important that you have a qualified and certificated sign language interpreter. Also, the proper use of video phones and relay services as a means of communicating with doctors, appointments, and DMV and so forth. Those calls are done via a relay service where they can sign on the phone, on the screen, and an interpreter will then voice to the opposite party in English. Next, I also want to implement and educate on money management. And that means, making and following a budget, using banking services, understanding how credit works, paying bills online. Those are all really important tools for, venturing into adulthood and living an independent life. Fourth, driver's license readiness. This is a big one, and this is something that's not introduced or really talked about much at the high school level. And it's very important, especially for our deaf and hard of hearing community, because those tests do require an interpreter. And I think a lot of students don't often realize that. So it's important that they, can read and comprehend the driver education manual. They can read it in English and comprehend it also receptively in American Sign Language. They understand and, and can pass sample versions of that written test to help them in obtaining a driver's license. And that's super important, especially for, older high school students, juniors and seniors, because they're going to be venturing off into adulthood and they need transportation for work, and they're just as capable of driving as anybody else. And that's often what's the word I'm looking for? People think that they cannot drive just because they're deaf, and that's a misconception. So want to get that cleared up. Fifth, benefits counseling. Okay, so understanding the eligibility for entitlement programs such as food stamps, Social Security, supplemental income, Medi-Cal, and so forth. There's so many different programs and resources available, but often they've never been introduced to those agencies. They don't know how to fill out the proper paperwork. And so it's really just equipping them for those moments. Next, social skills. So this is a big one. As a hearing individual, we learn through incidental learning, right? We're exposed to auditory cues, visual cues, and we're able to piece those together. Well, with our deaf and hard of hearing students, they really miss out on a lot of that incidental learning, right? Because they're not picking up those auditory cues verbally and just subtle cues that are so important for socialization. So I really want to help enhance their ability to interact with hearing individuals, teaching good hygiene, social cues, understanding body language, all very important. Next, daily living skills, right? So just housekeeping, laundry, shopping, meal preparation. And my goal with this program is, whether it's developed and created as a before and after school program, or if it's a during school hours program, I really want to be able to take those students out into the community, teach them how to utilize a bank card, how to access money from the ATM. How do I get a bus card? How do I get a trolley card? How can I pull up the bus schedule on my phone, right? If I'm at a restaurant and I don't have access to an ASL interpreter, how can I type on my notes, show the customer service representative or the waiter what I want, and use that as a means of communication? So there's so many different aspects of survival that go beyond the classroom. And I think that is my overall goal, is preparing this community that is already disadvantaged, because like I said, they're missing out on a lot of that incidental learning, preparing them for adulthood and living an independent life and a successful life. So I'm hoping that through this grant, through my education, through my degree, I can, advance to an administrative position where I'll have more ability to create programs such as this to help that community that I work for and I love so much and I'm very passionate about. So I thank you for taking time to listen to my goals and my plans for the future. And thank you for just being a part of this experience. I'm extremely grateful. All right.
Hi, my name is Katherine Maldonado. I'm currently a PhD candidate in the Department of Sociology at UC Santa Barbara, and I am gratefully AAUW Dissertation Fellowship winner from this year. And I'm going to be talking broadly about my dissertation research, which looks at the relationship between child welfare system involvement and mental health of Chicana Latina mothers in Southern California. So the research questions that are guiding my research are: how do child welfare cases impact the mental health and mothering of Latina Chicana mothers after involvement with the child welfare system? And what strategies of mother work do mothers use to cope and heal from their experiences induced by child welfare surveillance? So I'm really looking at sort of two major areas within their involvement, sort of how they are navigating mental health after they've had legal cases with the child welfare system, whether that be temporary separation, long-term separation, or adoption with their children, and how they navigate that separation under surveillance and punishment, right? And how they create healing within that punishment. So for my data and methods, I collected photo elicitation, life history, and interviews with Chicana Latina mothers from Southern California. And a lot of the mothers are undocumented, migrants from Central America, including Guatemala, Mexico, El Salvador, and Chicana mothers who identify, who were raised here and identify as Chicana. And primarily, a lot of the interviews are coming from places like South Central Los Angeles, which I'm showing here, right? Primarily Southern California, but I'm showing South Central Los Angeles because it really showcases how the sort of investment of criminalization more broadly in the community that the women are coming from. So a lot of them are from the Inland Empire as well, so Riverside, San Bernardino counties. But I wanted to showcase this picture here just to see that the areas that women are coming from, who I'm interviewing, right, are coming from places where there's a hyper-criminalization going on and an intersection between, right, the connection with the criminal legal system and the child welfare system, right, which is a relationship that I'm kind of investigating further as they're navigating these multiple institutions. And so mothers shared photographs to tell their life stories. And so we would sit down and they would share different types of photographs and tell their life stories and journeys, experiences, within the time they were experiencing child removal, after, and sort of how they coped through that whole experience, and so their life stories through visuals, photographs, and things like that. So an overview of my findings, the first chapter is looking at, the relationality of stigmatized statuses. So, how when they're gang affiliated, survivors are of interpersonal violence, undocumented, disabled, they have welfare cases, substance users, formerly incarcerated, right? What that intersection of mental health looks like for poor mothers of color. So I show how the relationality of stigmatized statuses are used against family reunification and to justify punishment in the child welfare system. I focus on the ways that power, stigma, and the therapeutic state care intensify criminalization and deteriorate the biopsychosocial health of mothers. And I document how mothers who live at the crossroads of violence and addiction are not only labeled unfit, but medically treated with punitive practices that further affect mental health and family separation responses. The second chapter of my dissertation is sort of looking at the long-term institutional violence, post-involvement of CPS cases, stressors, PTSD, anxieties, depression. But I focus more on the corruption and recidivism in the Inland Empire and Los Angeles Children and Family Courts to illuminate a key aspect of life course criminalization, which is the creation of racialized risk factors that impact on mental health, stressors, and motherhood responses. I argue that in this cyclical system of criminalization, Latina mothers are dealing with interpersonal and institutional intersections of violence that intensify maternal stressors. I document corruption by showing how child welfare recidivism is a threat that is weaponized in the courts and legal practices of Southern California through adoption and separation. In the third chapter, I get into more of the intergenerational effects, mothering and the family, and the complex interactions of social, psychological, and biological dimensions of health, really theorizing on social determinants of health and how these construct pathways of trauma and justify medicalized carceral punitive logics within the child welfare system. I illustrate these pathways by documenting how Central American and undocumented mothers who are in recovery and separated from their children are navigating broader processes of migration, poverty, and gender violence that inform how child welfare punishment impacts on families' health across generations. I reflect on the historical context and situate life course criminalization and motherhood responses to the connection to global capitalism and within the relations of neoliberal health, child welfare, and immigration policies. In the fourth chapter, here's where I expand on my theoretical concept, which is system impacted mother work. which will be the thread of the entire, book project. My dissertation will be a book project, so it will be the thread. And so here I showcase the ways in which social determinants of health affect mother work strategies. So I turn my attention to the central response to criminalization, which what I propose call conceptualize as system impacted mother work, to show how mothers most tied to branches of the punitive system and socially constructed as unfit create strategies to navigate microcosms of contemporary U.S. medicalized carceral state, I argue. So this chapter departs from the harmful and long-term effects of criminalization on health and into the matriarch consciousness, where they illustrate how families create safety for family protection, aspirations for collective material well-being, and spiritual resistance for mental well-being. So conceptually, system impact and mother work challenges the evolving modes of criminalization and surveillance, which do not account for the resistance that families of color develop to survive amidst inequality. The last chapter of my dissertation looks more broadly now at how system impact and mother work contributes as a tenet of mobilization to larger patterns of resistance, and looking at, the emergence of family policing as a movement that has potential to shift how we view resistance patterns in the US and transnationally through the experiences of mothers who are advocating against family policing in their everyday lives. And some implications of my research is thinking about how healthcare accountability and family reunification interventions. So really, theorizing on the ways that we can sort of shift how healthcare is practiced, shifting risk assessments and child welfare policy with triangulation of assessments that are healing centered, right? Thinking about how we shift these risk assessments that frame mothers as unfit and psychologically, mentally unfit to raise children. So shifting it to a healing centered, and thinking about the biopsychosocial pathways of stress and health outcomes. So really thinking about the connection between, the bodies, the psychology, the social experiences of mothers and these pathways of stress and how they impact health, and interconnected with how they're interacting with multiple systems at the same time, right? So different directions to take with my work. So thank you for listening to my work, and I'm excited to build community within AAUW.
Hello. To begin, I'd just like to thank AAUW for your support and this opportunity to share my work with all of you. So hi, I'm Jennifer Noji, and I'm a PhD candidate and teaching fellow at the University of California, Los Angeles. And I'm currently working on my dissertation, a project that AAUW is generously supporting through granting me the Dissertation Year Fellowship. So my scholarship and teaching in general focus on 20th and 21st century multi-ethnic literatures, particularly works that reckon and resist events and structures of political violence. I have additional expertise in critical race theory, narrative studies, human rights, and memory studies. And in this video, I'll introduce my general interests as a researcher and then offer an overview of my dissertation project, which is titled The Implicated Reader: Politics of Address in Literatures of Political Violence. All right, so generally speaking, as a researcher, I'm chiefly interested in how narratives and representations of political violence influence collective and individual understandings of and responses to such violence. I'm particularly interested in how historically marginalized, oppressed, and racialized people deploy literature and language to reckon with social injustice. And as a researcher, I think it's important to mention that I really am deeply committed to the public humanities, that is, producing publicly engaged scholarship that makes academic research relevant, useful, and accessible to non-academic communities and their real-world problems. All right, so that said, let me offer a brief overview of my dissertation project. My dissertation explores how literature can employ formal and rhetorical techniques to implicate readers in political violence by inviting readers to view such violence and the relationship to it from a new and critical perspective. So this project conceptualizes what I call the implicated reader by bringing Michael Rothberg's concept of the implicated subject, a figure who is neither a victim nor perpetrator, but rather indirectly enables or benefits from regimes of violence, into conversation with formalist and narrative studies, particularly the idea of the implied reader. So by bringing these two terms together, I propose the term implicated reader to designate an implied reader who is implicated in the violent events and structures represented in the given text. I suggest that rather than facilitating the reader's empathy and identification with victimized subjects, some literary works challenge injustice and provoke political responsibility by prompting readers to imagine themselves in the position of someone who contributes to rather than suffers from political violence. The project thus addresses the key question: how can literature transform the way we understand events and structures of violence, as well as our implication in them? To answer this question, I examine a large corpus of texts by writers of color, including Mohsin Hamid, Dina Nayeri, Julia Tsuka, Tommy Orange, and many others. So I examined these texts by these writers who depict diverse cases of violence, ranging from forced displacement and detention to racial discrimination and genocide. And by using a method of relational comparison, quoting Shumeishi there, a method that is transnational in scope and attentive to difference in power relations, I identify distinct forms of reader implication across different genres, in particular novels, poetry, memoir, and autofiction. And I investigate in particular how writers use provocative modes of address to the reader, including second person you and plural we forms. So to give you an idea of this theory of reader implication, I wanted to offer a quick example. So let's take a look at Jamaica Kincaid's book-length essay, A Small Place. Okay, so Kincaid's book, which critiques Antigua's legacy of colonialism and contemporary tourism industry, has become well known for its caustic direct address to the reader. While Kincaid claims to speak for native Antiguans, quote, "We Antiguans, for I am one," she explicitly defines her addressee as a white Western tourist, quote, "You are a tourist, a North American or European, to be frank, white." Kincaid's use of second-person address here creates an I versus you division, situating readers in the position of white tourists located in opposition to Black native Antiguans. As a result, the book on the one hand highlights the incommensurable disparities and experiences between these two groups of people. For example, while tourists can enjoy Antigua's beautiful climate, quote, that is deliciously hot and dry, native Antiguans, quote, suffer constantly from drought. And, another example, while, quote, you can take a bath and brush your teeth, quote, we have to watch carefully every drop of water that is used. So you see this I versus you division forming just in the language that is used, the second person address. So the book then, on the other hand, also illuminates how you are implicated in present-day Antiguans' experiences of poverty and exploitation, which Kincaid suggests are consequences of Antigua's history of colonialism and slavery, a history in which you, quote, you are also implicated. Thus, in describing who you are and what you have done, I think that Kincaid boldly challenges her readers to recognize their implication and responsibility. She even explicitly writes, "You will have to accept that this is mostly your fault," end quote. So, although brief, I hope this example begins to demonstrate how literary address, in this case, second person address, can work to implicate the reader. So, by demonstrating how writers, many of whom experience the violence they depict, can construct text to implicate their readers, this project not only proposes a new framework for literary analysis, but it also intervenes, or rather illuminates, how people can use literature as a tool to contest political violence. The project thereby shows the political implications of literary form, revitalizing formalist criticism and intervening in discussions of literary resistance and reader responsibility. It also contributes to recent scholarship in narrative ethics, comparative ethnic studies, critical race theory, and critical human rights studies. Additionally, by using an analytical framework grounded in implication rather than complicity, as other projects have done, my project explores how forms of political responsibility for I'm able to explore forms of political responsibility for violence that occurs not just during one's lifetime, but also before one's birth. Since we, can be implicated in violence before we were born, but we can't be complicit in it. Therefore, this project also adds to work in memory studies by examining how literature renegotiates remembrance of past violence. And I thought it would be worth mentioning that an article based on my dissertation is forthcoming in the literary journal Narrative. And if you're interested in this kind of work, I would highly encourage you to check it out. It should be published in January 2024. In any case, I hope this brief overview gave you some insight into the type of research that I'm interested in and that I'm committed to producing. And to end, I actually just wanted to again thank AAUW for their generous support and thank all of you for listening.
Hi everyone, my name is Herdís Pálsdóttir and I'm a proud AAUW International Master's Degree Fellowship grantee for the 2023 to 2024 school year. So I'm going to start with a little bit of introduction. So I'm 26 years old and I'm born and raised in Iceland. I got my undergrad in psychology from Roque University. And when I was an undergrad, I started working at a small residential school for children with autism and severe problem behavior. I soon realized that this is something that I wanted to do. So my boss introduced me to this program in California. And a long story short, I'm now a third-year grad student getting my master's in applied behavior analysis at California State University in Sacramento. So when you apply to this program, you apply to the, When you apply to this program, you apply to the program itself and then to a specific research lab that is on campus. And I'm a proud member of the Verbal Behavior Research Laboratory under the advisement of Dr. Miguel. So what we do is that we meet once a week where we go over our research, and the lab is usually publishing around 5 to 10 research articles each year, which is really, really cool. And the lab's mission overall is to expand the behavioral analytic approach to language and cognition, with the specific goals to understand environmental variables that give rise to verbal and verbally meditated behaviors. And second of all, to manipulate these variables to teach different forms of communication to individuals with autism and other developmental disabilities. I'm also a member of SAPA, that is the Student Association for Applied Behavior Analysis at Sac State. The club mission is to promote the study of applied behavior analysis by providing its members with opportunities in the field, such as social networking, workshops, conferences, and guest lecture events. So before I go into explaining my research, I want to talk about how I plan to utilize my education and my specific post-graduation plans. So the first one is to move back to Iceland and implement all the things that I learned here in the States and just overall continue to gaining experience as both a researcher and a practitioner or a clinician. I want to get my PhD in applied behavior analysis, and my end overall goal is to open a school or organization or something that provides early intervention to young children with autism. But this is really missing back home right now. So I'm really excited about that. So now I'm going to talk to you about my research project. I'm going to start with some introduction, but interventions that are based on the principle of behavior analysis are the most commonly utilized treatment for individuals with autism. And these interventions are scientifically supported, and continued research over the past several decades has repeatedly shown its effectiveness. Early interventions for toddlers with autism has been shown to help reduce autism symptoms and provide long-term outcomes. So specifically, intensive behavior analytic intervention that includes a 1-to-1 adult-to-child ratio for about 25 to 40 hours per week can produce higher success in language, cognitive, and adaptive skills compared to fewer service hours and a higher adult-to-child ratio. It does seem that early intervention could be a critical variable, and it is really important that we start as soon as we can in order to addressing this achievement gap that we often see between individuals with autism and other typically developing children, and it can prevent more extreme autism symptoms from occurring in the future, such as severe problem behavior, etc. However, there is a limited time and often resources that clinicians have to help these young individuals with autism to close this achievement gap. And that is why it's impossible for clinicians to teach every single skill in a direct one-to-one setting. So my project essentially will be examining a teaching method that has been used to teach verbal behavior to children with ASD and other developmental disabilities. But finding an effective and time-efficient method for teaching verbal behavior is crucial, as it could reduce the likelihood of a severe problem behavior occurring in the future. A lot of problem behavior that individuals with autism engage in could simply be due to that they can't communicate their wants and needs, and we know it ourselves. If all of a sudden our language is gone, our ability to communicate our wants and needs, we would probably be pretty frustrated too. And it is for that reason why the parameters and the results must be examined to depth to provide reliable database guidelines for both practitioners and researchers. Research does suggest that in order to learn a language, we need to be able to behave and react as both a speaker and a listener. So we can speak with understanding, we need to react as a listener to what is said. So we need to understand the words and orient ourselves to the item that's talked about. For example, if someone says, "Hey, look at the red car," we know to orient our head towards the car, and that way we are reacting as a listener. And it's also important that we can behave as a speaker, because then we can demand or ask for items and express our feelings, or yeah. So essentially we are going to be examining if we can implement this specific teaching method where we only teach the children to react as a listener, and by doing that, if they following training, they can behave as a speaker instead. So we're gonna teach them to react as a listener, and we're gonna measure if they can react as a speaker following that teaching method. We are also going to be examining generalization. That is important because we want our students to be able to generalize their responses to other environments or to different stimuli. So for example, a common skill that's often taught to individuals with autism is to respond to their name. So the teacher starts by teaching them to engage in eye contact or orient themselves towards the person who's calling the name. And so following that basic training, we also want the kids to be able to respond when their parents are calling the name or their friends, etc. Like not only the teacher. And we also want the skill to generalize to other environments, such as a playground or in the store. So that is also a really, really important part, and that we're gonna both examine and measure in this project. So a total of 5 sets of experimental stimuli will be selected for each participant. So these are the pictures we're gonna teach the children, and each set will consist of 4 two-dimensional pictures of unfamiliar but not abstract stimuli. So here we have bird, fruit, animal, and a flower. So here we see a figure of the procedure. We're going to start with some preface assessment to identify potential reinforcers, and we're going to do some assessments to see where their verbal repertoire stands before the intervention. Then we implement the teaching procedure where we only teach them to point to the correct picture after hearing the name, so respond as a listener. And finally, after that, we test, and we can see if they can respond as a speaker, or if they can point to a different picture of the same item that wasn't directly taught during the procedure. So what we expect to find, well, it is expected, as the previous literature has shown, that early on after teaching the one set, we're going to see generalization across other stimuli within the same class. So meaning that we're going to teach one picture, and then we do expect that they can respond to similar but not the same picture of the same item. With regards to emergence, or this, if they will respond as a speaker after we teach them to respond as a listener, only time will tell. Essentially, we do hypothesize that it's going to vary across participants, but we hope to see this emergent. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Laura Roque, and my project and novel in progress is called I Want a Diana. So an explanation of my project. My dissertation, I Want a Diana, a novel, focuses on an adolescent Cuban-American girl raised in the wake of her immigrant father's murder. Diana is guarded by mommy, refined but hardened as she works low-paying jobs and seeks out vocational schools, while keeping her eyes steadily on her daughter. Mommy's co-parent is Abuela, an austere and confrontational octogenarian who once took on the neighbor's escaped Rottweiler with just an umbrella. Mommy and Abuela have nurtured Diana with heaps of fortitude to ensure her survival, and so she is unafraid to pursue her desires from a young age. Though Diana has the naivete of adolescence, she is forthright, intelligent, and self-serving. I Want a Diana pays homage to fiction that makes space for women to explore their power. At 14, Diana pursues Jesus Alba, an earnest boy with practical dreams who wants to marry her. When her attentions stray, Diana gains a promiscuous reputation around school that she then uses to grant herself more freedom. This novel is largely about the consequences women face for behaving like the men who oppress them. Diana's last relationship in the text is with a captivating but incredibly machista boy who attempts to dismantle her through careful manipulation. Diana is entrapped, but ultimately she cannot help fighting back. Diana is undeniably herself, which intensifies the violence and endangers her life. Through these characters, anecdotal evidence, and research, I Want a Diana, a novel, picks apart matriarchal family structures, educational inequity, female sexuality, and girlhood in an immigrant community. Told in the second person, the you can feel like a conversation Diana is having with herself, while it also blurs the division between audience and narrator, inserting majority audiences within minority female experiences. The you is also accusatory in nature, grants Diana agency while it seeks much-needed accountability from patriarchal systems of power. So what is this project doing? I Want a Diana, a novel, is a work of autofiction, employs narrative prose and structure to examine gender inequity. Teenage protagonist Diana is being raised by 2 immigrant women who are forces of nature and have been forced into low-paying gendered occupations and other disadvantaged social positions. Compartmentalized as bombshells or maids, there is a history of portraying U.S. Latinas as sex objects for the male gaze or subservient figures completely void of agency. I Want a Diana, a novel, will consider multiple representations of women of color at various stages of their lives. Using the second person, this project consistently operates through a speculative, sympathetic, and subversive female lens. The setting is also crucial. Within Latinx literature, notable books explore the Cuban-American experience, but virtually none focus on Hialeah, Florida. The few texts about Hialeah's Cuban-American women, such as work by Janine Capo-Cruzet, tend to concentrate on these women navigating white spaces. Hialeah, Florida is very unique and vital to Miami's cultural makeup. Composed of over 200,000 Cuban and Cuban Americans, it exists as a piece of the island within North America, with alfilador and viandero trucks and American children who won't learn to speak English until they start school at 5 years old. As of recently, big tech and developers have moved into Miami's working class neighborhoods to erase them. Hialeah is a locus of Cuban America that is imperative to preserve, and exposure through this project could set these preservation efforts in motion. My project is also written in Hialeah's rhythmic Cuban American dialect. This dialect is much more than just Spanglish, but is composed of direct English translations of Spanish and specifically Cuban phrases. A few months ago, a study was released by Florida International University stating that Miami-Dade had a new dialect. I wouldn't consider this dialect particularly new, as it has existed since the 1980s Cuban exodus, or maybe even before that, and has always been a focal point of my fiction and research projects. I'll play a clip of a news broadcast announcing the supposed discovery of this new dialect.
Okay, have you heard yourself or others say things like get down from the car or ride bike?
Well, for many in South Florida, these are common expressions, but if you're not from here, you may not understand. Well, it turns out it's a new dialect that's emerging.
It's official then.
Yeah.
If you are Cuban American, have any Cuban in your family, then you helped create it.
Yes.
Born and raised?
It's an only in Dade dialect. Have you put into Florida International University? The dialect incorporates what linguists call calques or borrowed translations from the speaker's native language. In this case, Spanish. Most of the time, it's a literal translation.
Tell me if you say any of these. What about married with? Like I'm married with someone instead of married to.
I just say that.
I just say the married with, yeah.
Thank God.
Thank God. What about like something like when you're ordering empanadas and they're like, I want a chicken empanada, I want a cheese empanada, and I want a meat empanada instead of a beef?
I say meat empanada.
Yeah. Empanada. Okay.
This project structure is ordered by chronological experiences Diana has with romantic attachment, with an array of individuals she meets at her Title I public school. Romantic attachments will culminate with the aforementioned abusive relationship. This is also a coming-of-age plot. It's tracking Diana's journey from girl to woman with a buildings roman framing. This is what we know as the hero's journey, a structure that is traditionally white, privileged, and male. And I'm reconfiguring this genre. Through Diana, the female gaze will be granted equal power to the male gaze. The hero's journey is frequently epiphanic. Diana's buildings roman will feature significant growth and change without being a trajectory to an affluency related to American assimilation. After 4 years of high school, Diana will be accepted into an upper-class university, but movement between Hialeah and this white space of higher learning will ultimately be fluid, as the plot works to draw a bicultural web regardless of Diana's physical location. During the difficult college chapters, with fierce effort and luck, Diana will catch up to her classmates. She will barely survive her abusive relationship. This project will not only explore layers of gendered repression, but emphasize a critical need for solutions with urgency. My research methodology involves evaluating anecdotal evidence from interviews and my own experiences while studying critical texts on domestic abuse, the gatekeeping of U.S. education, and the gendered effects of forced migration. I've studied all Cuban American works of fiction and over 100 texts of Latinx and women's fiction over the last 3 years. I've conducted archival research on Cuban women's experiences on and off the island, exploring literacy and economic stability. Using a blend of these multi-genre subsets of information, I've weaved fact with fiction, used prose and rhetorical technique to carefully construct a narrative arc. I've spent 8 years outlining, researching, and revising this project. I have visited Miami, Florida during the summers of 2021, 2022, and 2023 to interview Cuban American women. I visited female spaces such as nail salons, supermarkets, and even churches, had detailed exchanges about forced migration and upward mobility for women. I have been in contact with Latina victims of domestic abuse and use these interviews to unpack the various social and economic factors that make us particularly vulnerable, including but not limited to overseas families, a lack of career opportunities, lack of career opportunities linked to language barriers, machismo, and access to healthcare. To close, as was mentioned before, my project is a work of autofiction, and autofiction is very unique in that it uses two opposing narrative forms simultaneously. In this case, it's using autobiography and fiction. And just some background how I came to this project. Without my father, my once dependent mother grew assertive as she worked minimum wage office jobs and attended night school. My grandmother watched me while my mother was at 3 places at once, cooked meals with food stamps while working as a seamstress. Because of my background and where I come from, I am deeply invested in the lives women create when men are absent, and I use fiction to explore why these lives are important. The women who raised me felt I was left with a void, one they worked relentlessly to fill. I was seen and understood, and this is what I want my work to do for women. I have always known that I needed to write stories that honor the women I know. My mother and grandmother embellished my late father to sainthood. Still, I wasn't formed by this elusive male figure, but by two real women who found ways to navigate a world that wasn't designed for them while advocating for me without fault. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carla Salazar Gonzalez, and my pronouns are she, her, ella. I am a PhD candidate in sociology at UCLA. I want to begin by thanking AAUW and its generous sponsors for supporting my dissertation research. Today, I am sharing a brief summary of my overall dissertation project titled Race and Gender in U.S. Immigration Policy, Mothers Seeking Asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border. This is where my research takes place at the Tijuana side of the U.S.-Mexico border. This work is also personal for me because I spent parts of my childhood in Tijuana, sometimes unhoused, and living in rough neighborhoods. I followed migration and border development in Tijuana ever since I can remember, really. But before I had the theoretical tools to analyze the movement of people and their experiences with immigration law and border policy. And this brings me to what has been happening at the Mexican side of the US-Mexico border, in particular in the last 5 years. A manufactured crisis designed to mask the human rights violations that happen when individuals are denied the right to seek asylum and not be returned to a country where their lives are in danger. What we have seen in this last 5 years is more mothers with their children migrating, and many from Central American countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. They come to the border seeking protection from the US. And while Central American migration is not new, what is different today is the carceral logic behind how asylum seekers are treated as individuals with the potential to cause harm. And therefore, their bodies must be excluded from the US and contained outside of the US territory, in this case, Mexico, and punished so that innocent people around them can remain safe. This of course ignores US involvement in the region, which contributed to the conditions for the migration we see today. In one way, asylum seekers are kept out of the US are through border policies, cruel border policies such as the Migrant Protections Protocol, MPP, which is a US Department of Homeland Security, DHS program that initiated asylum seekers' immigration proceedings and ordered that they wait in Mexico throughout these proceedings. Of course, this policy, also known as Remain in Mexico, came into effect during a hostile administration towards immigrants that trafficked and feared of immigrants of color in particular by referring to them as criminals, rapists, and a threat to the US. During the time of MPP, 2019 to 2022, roughly, over 71,000 asylum seekers were sent to Mexico. Many of these were women with their children. And although MPP was officially terminated in 2022, it has since morphed into other forms of restrictions, appointments that continue to make the process of seeking asylum confusing and lengthy and dangerous. This exclusion of vulnerable groups of people, in this case, women with children, in Tijuana, requires us to care enough to try to understand what happens to them as they are forced to remain in a third country while or before seeking asylum in the US. It is this need for understanding that takes me to my research questions, which are: one, what are the consequences of restrictive border policies and immigration laws for mothers seeking asylum in the US and in Mexico, while in Mexico? And two, how do their social identities shape how asylum-seeking mothers are affected by and respond to immigration border policies and legal processes? Next, I want to share the methods, which consist of interviews and participant observations that I conducted in Tijuana from 2019 to 2022. I conducted these interviews and observations primarily when I was volunteering at Al Otro Lado in Tijuana. Al Otro Lado is a nonprofit organization that provides legal guidance and connects migrants in Tijuana with very important resources, and they are doing very important work in Tijuana. To conduct these interviews and observations, I also visited shelters and met with women in public areas in Tijuana. I want to share some of my preliminary results or findings through 3 quotes. So Tatiana from El Salvador shares that in the interview, this is the interview they do when they cross the border to seek protection. She adds, they told us that due to the new law that the US president had put in place, MPP, that we had to return to Mexico, and they made us sign some papers, and like they make you afraid, and like one doesn't know anything, is not aware that they are going to have us detained with our children, and they threaten you with fear that they are going to take your children away. This quote captures from Tatiana is that all the confusion, the certainty surrounding this process, where she was asked to sign something she didn't quite understand, but what she did understand well was this threat of being separated from her children and being detained. This threat of separation is specific to them as mothers and points to the psychological cost associated with seeking asylum under these conditions. This brings us to the next quote from Remedios from Honduras. She says, they bring us in the Perrera dog pound in those trucks, and they leave you in the border. They only give you a permit, and they give you a paper so that you can return in 38 days. They just give you that and leave you. They tell you to go back walking, and until your next court date, you're there waiting. Here, one of the hardest part of being in Tijuana, as I've learned from these women, and with Remedios, who I met several times during my time at Al Otro Lado, is that doing the waiting in Tijuana, in this place that is not their home, that they don't know, and that presents many dangers for them as women with children, this is the hardest part. These families, some come alone, some come with children or with their partners. They must find a way to survive in Tijuana. That is, find a way to either pay for a room or find shelter. And some of these shelters have restrictions. And then they have to find a way to cover the necessities, food, schooling, medicine, doctor's appointments, anything they might need when they're there. The next quote from Sandra from Guatemala, she shares, detention was like, I don't know, I feel like it was something like a punishment because they left me there the first night alone with my son, but only like that concrete, in that concrete floor. We had to wake up there. Then they put us with all the women in the room where they all sleep. And then the next day, they took us to take a shower, and it was like 3 a.m. with cold water and my son to bathe. 2 days later, they sent me to Mexicali. Here, Sandra highlights the very real physical consequences seeking asylum in the U.S. Their bodies are placed in cages, really, and put through conditions of confinement and punishment. But they're not criminals yet. Their bodies are treated as that of belonging to a criminal. And in conclusion, first and foremost, I want to highlight that these are real people with real lived experiences and in their countries, in Mexico, with the U.S. They are mothers with their children. They are families wanting what all of us want as humans, to have a chance to live freely, to provide for our families and imagine a future with them. But their rights are denied, and they are treated like undeserving for asking for asylum in the U.S. and simply because of who they are. Through my interviews and observations, I hope to uncover the ways in which it matters that they are brown, that they are women, and that they are mothers, that they are coming with children, and why this is a threat to the U.S. And lastly, what my interviews show is that there are real physical and psychological consequences, some of which we've yet to fully uncover in the years to come for these women and their families. And these are the consequences of these cruel policies like MPP. Thank you.